Welcome, everybody, to the Wizard of Radical Self-Respect. Thank you very much for tuning in. This Saturday, I will be recording my first episode of the Interview with a Survivor series. I'll be interviewing an LPC who's been through it herself, a licensed professional counselor. I'm really looking forward to that interview. And today, what we're going to be talking about is religious narcissists. Now, I know some people will think I'm bad talking religion with this episode, but I'm not talking bad about religion. I'm just going to talk about some of the negative things that religious narcissists will do. There are people that are in religion that are not narcissistic, but we're going to be talking about the narcissistic variety. But before I get into that, please do subscribe to the channel if you have not already. I normally talk about radical self-respect, narcissism, sometimes other cluster B disorders, recovering from codependency, after the relationship with a narcissist, practicing radical self-respect, interviews, and I will also be doing more supplement videos as well. Occasionally I hit on the dating topic too, but not as much these days. But jumping right in now. So the religious narcissists, often narcissistic people, it's all about control to them. And since narcissistic people are really into control, they will gravitate towards religion a lot of times because religion provides them a very rigid framework and a rigid code of conduct on how to live. And often people who are religious and narcissistic, they can act pretty similar. Now, image will be very important to them. They're very interested in how things look to the outside world. So they want to have the appearances of the perfect family, even if at home that's not what's going on at all. But they want the appearance to be that everything is perfect, everything is hunky-dory. And again, it doesn't mean the reality is that, but it's very important to them. That's what other people think. And the religious narcissist will also be very self-righteous. They will think that their way is the correct way. And since narcissists also see things in a hierarchical sense, they will often be kind of competitive with who is the best Christian or who is the best Muslim or fill in the blank with whatever religion. And if they don't like the way a conversation is going, they can always pull back and reframe it and say, well, I'm a better Christian, or I bet that person isn't a good Christian, or a good Muslim, or a good practicing Jew, or whatever, right? It doesn't matter what the religion is. The narcissistic people can go to any kind of religion. But I've also noticed that religious people often have hang-ups about sex. And I'm always reminded, too, of Oscar Wilde's expression, it is not selfish to live as you want to live, but it is selfish to try to get other people to live as you live. And unfortunately, some people that practice religions can be pretty insufferable with trying to get others to live as they live. It's one thing if they did it the way NA or AA does, which is a program of attraction rather than promotion. That, to me, is a much better way to go. But when they try to shove it down people's throats, often people just want to put up their hand and go the other way and then do the opposite. But growing up, often they will raise their children in a very repressed kind of household, and they will use a lot of guilt and shame. And throughout all of this, they will weaponize a lot of religious principles, and they will throw them around to guilt and shame the people in their family. And this is especially true with sex. And I think with sex, there's a lot of people that grow up in religious households that since they were always shamed about that topic, they don't integrate it well into their adult life. And so they have a lot of guilt and shame wrapped up in their sexual expression, whatever that is. And there is a difference, though, mind you, between shame and toxic shame. Shame can be, oops, I made a mistake. Toxic shame is when you think your whole being is the mistake. And sometimes religious parents, they can communicate that message to their children that, you are the mistake. You aren't just the person that made a mistake. You and how you are, your whole person, is a mistake. And you can see how that would have some negative effects growing up. But let's talk about some specific examples of how the religious narcissist shows up. So often they will manipulate and twist religious principles. And I see this in two different ways. So one would be when they're trying to get people to ignore their own bad behaviors, or they're trying to get people to dismiss their bad behaviors, right? And they'll throw around a spiritual principle or a religious principle like honor your father and mother. And meanwhile, what they're doing with that is covering their tracks. And they're saying, yes, do this, listen to me, but do as I say, not as I do. And there will be a lot of this with a lot of the religious narcissistic people, which is they hold themselves to a different standard than the people they are trying to get to meet these standards. That's another good tell. And it's like what they say, when you match someone's actions and they don't like it, that's a problem. And I always remember, what's his face? Oh man, Theo Von, he would say, a great way to tell someone that, to call them out on it, would be, if you could ever meet yourself, you'd hate it. And I got that from Theo Von. I'm giving that one to him, but I think that one's pretty good. So they often play rules for me or rules for thee, but not for me. That's another big thing they like to play by there. So they'll have hang-ups about sex, and they'll twist and use religious principles to get away with their own bad behaviors or try to control other people. Another way they will do this is about forgiveness, where they will say, oh, a real Muslim or a real Christian would forgive. Now, in my opinion, the only real apology is changed behavior. But say maybe someone stole money, and it's the religious person who stole money, which clearly is against their code of conduct. But instead of apologizing and say they were wrong, they might say, well, you need to forgive me to be a good Christian. And it's like, that's them twisting it around there. You don't have to forgive anyone for anything. And even if you do forgive, it doesn't always mean you have to let someone back into your life. I believe in forgiveness from afar. But ultimately, what I try to get people to do is just to see things in a way so that they're least likely to hold on to resentment, meaning they'll see it in a way that helps them to be the happiest and healthiest version of themselves. That's the goal I have for people, is to get to that point. I don't care how they get to that point, but letting go of resentment's usually a good thing. But not everyone deserves to truly be forgiven and letting back into your life. That's for sure. But the religious narcissist, they might try to throw around that forgiveness principle to get you to ignore your boundaries and for you to ignore their bad behavior, which is pretty repugnant, if you ask me. Another way they can go about it is, like I said, with the 10 Commandments and obeying your parents. Well, a lot of narcissistic parents, period, religious or not, they do a lot of damage to their children. And they'll want to bully, intimidate, and control. And unlike what a lot of religious principles would say, I don't believe mothers and fathers are always correct. Now, at the time, you might think they are, but especially if it's a narcissistic parent, it's very likely they are not. And it's very likely they are harming their children in a lot of different ways, mentally, emotionally, etc. Or even if it's just stymieing their growth and stymieing their autonomy. And that's the other thing the religious parents do, is since they're so into control, they're not really good at getting people to become their own person and helping them to develop their own autonomy. They have a very set in stone way of living, and they want people to meet their narcissistic fantasies, whatever they are. And each set of religious parents will have a different set of fantasies, but if their children do not live up to that fantasy, there will be hell to pay. And they'll be met with guilt, and they'll be met with shame, and they'll be met with all sorts of other toxic negative emotions. But it's not very pleasant for the children. So often in these kinds of households, the kids, they have to develop this protective layer that kind of shields them from their parents' behavior. Now, the other thing that can also happen is they can create a child that becomes a narcissist themselves. And often they're similar to the religious parent. And so the religious parent likes them. And they can also, create narcissistic people. But they can also create the opposite, which is more of a codependent slash empath type person where they will have a shell around them and they will no longer show their authentic selves to their parents because they know it's going to be guilted, it's going to be shamed. And so they know to hide it and they repress what's going on inside of them. And often they really only feel comfortable being themselves with very few people, if any. And this is part of the trope of the Catholic schoolgirl trope or the person who goes off to college and goes wild. That's part of what's going on in these situations where they lived in such a repressed environment growing up. Autonomy was not encouraged. It was very rigid, very controlling. You had to live a certain way, live up to appearances, so that when they finally get the freedom, then they go off the rocker. I've seen this a lot. This is why they say in Amish country, Lancaster, that's kids are given the freedom when they're 16 years old to kind of go on a pilgrimage. And some of those kids, they choose to go wild on that pilgrimage because they lived in a very structured and repressed environment, I believe, is one of the reasons. And again, though, not all religious households are like this. I'm talking about more so the religious narcissistic households. Because granted, no matter what somebody is, whether they're religious, whether they're atheist, whether they're spiritual, or addict, alcoholic, really into politics, it doesn't matter. A narcissistic individual will be harmful no matter what their beliefs are, whether they are religious beliefs, spiritual beliefs, or whatever. They are the yoga person. I mean, narcissism does not discriminate. It can show up in any person. Any person can be one, and then they can go into any number of fields. No field is left untouched by the narcissist. So, with the religious ones, they just have their certain kind of behaviors that are their go-tos. And again, there's a lot of control involved, a lot of image involved, and the twisting and distorting of a lot of religious and spiritual principles. And also for some of the more ambitious religious narcissists, they can try to move up the ranks and say the Catholic Church, for example, they can try to be a deacon, or they can try to move up the ladder because that's important to them. And a lot of those kinds, though, what they'll do is you'll realize it's less about the religion and being a good Christian or a good Muslim or whatever, and it's more about the status they can achieve, right? So there's the three S's, the three A's, and the three E's of narcissism. It's good to kind of touch up on these. The three E's are entitlement, and what are the other two? Entitlement, and then there's two others that I can't remember right now, unfortunately. But the three A's are attention, admiration, and acknowledgement. The three S's are status, sensitivity, and shame. And the three E's, entitlement, and then two others that I can't remember for some reason off the top of my head. That's not very good. But the religious narcissistic person, they like to gravitate towards fields where they can get the three A's and they can cover up the shame that's inside of them. Because often they had a parent that was also religious and narcissistic. And instead of becoming the person that stuffed it and repressed it all, to become more codependent, they became the narcissistic person themselves. And they still have all that toxic shame on the inside of them, but it comes out in a different way. It comes out in the narcissistic way. So I do feel for a lot of the kids that grow up in these kinds of households. It's not very good. But I want to look up here real quick what those three E's are, because I'm drawing a blank like a dope on what they are. So let's see. That's what it is. Exploitation and impaired empathy. So, religious people, if you ever get a chance to read the FBI's report on the Catholic Church in Pennsylvania, you will see an abundance of impaired empathy and exploitation. And it was madness to see what they uncovered there. And to think that they are supposed to be men of God, and then you see all the things they did instead to cover up the tracks of basically predators is unbelievable. It's wild and unbelievable. And I don't know how they lived with themselves doing that. It's unbelievable. And it should never have gone on as far as it did. And and this is where the people that weren't in on that stuff, that's the situation where you should probably be the whistleblower and you should speak up, because that's what courage is all about. But instead, what you saw was a narcissistic dynamic with all sorts of flying monkeys that committed abuse by proxy, that carry out the messaging of their narcissistic leaders, and all sorts of terrible acts were able to be covered up. And it's a damn shame. But check out that FBI report on the Catholic Church in Pennsylvania, and you might be blown away. But back to the religious narcissists, they will use the principles and twist them, often about forgiveness, often about some of the 10 Commandments, but ultimately it's rules for thee and not for me. So they will try to get other people to live in these ways. But when it comes to their own life, oh, not so much. It's like the pastor that likes to have a lot of affairs. Oh, I'll preach about being faithful and monogamous, but in my own life, this is what I'm going to do. And that wouldn't be as bad if he wasn't the person preaching that gospel, because no one is perfect. Everyone does have flaws, but it can be a little more repulsive when you're the one preaching it and then you're still doing it. And often I think the kids of the religious narcissists, they see this front and center, because a lot of times those are the people that try to be good in the community. They're going to try to be really helpful to other people and make sure they help others and make sure they're seen helping others. But inside the home, you might see a completely different person. You might see a person that's very controlling. You might see a person that's big into guilt and shame. And if they don't get their way, they may be very passive aggressive, or they might be outright aggressive. They might like silent treatments. But either way, and this is the other thing you see with a lot of the religious narcissists, they do not like disagreements. And sometimes when I was a political poller, I would meet people at the door, Catholics in particular, I would meet that would do this. And they would not be able to handle any other kinds of differing opinions without flipping the script, gaslighting, guilting, and shaming. It was their go-to. And they just couldn't help themselves but to do that. And so the narcissistic parents in the home, they often will do the same things to their kids, where if the kids wants to do a certain thing and the parents not feeling it, they're going to give lots of guilt and shame to their child. And they'll be passive aggressive about it or outright aggressive about it in some cases. But if they don't follow the footsteps that that narcissistic parent wants them to do, there will be hell to pay. Because again, if you boil down the behaviors of the narcissist, control is at the very bottom. And from control, there can be controlling other people, controlling their sources of supply, controlling their image, controlling what other people think of them, controlling their own environments, and for some of the more ambitious ones, just control over other people, genuine power over other people too. So that's at the base of it. And of course, they will all have their different versions of narcissistic supply. So a religious narcissist, their version of narcissistic supply may be just people giving them admiration for what a good Christian or religious person they are. And then if they're actually involved in the church and they might be trying to move up, they might get some supply from that. And they'll also get supply from their children, especially if they follow in their footsteps the way they want them to. Because to the narcissistic parent, their children are extensions of themselves. And as long as the children walk in step and in line with what the narcissistic parent wants, then everything is hunky-dory. But if they do not do that, and they kind of march to the beat of their own drum, the child does, then there's going to be all sorts of problems. They'll be met with guilt and shame. And that's when you see those are the kids that are the black sheep. They run wild. They can go off and about. And those are the ones that get themselves in trouble. Yeah, it is sad. It is sad. But again, everything has to be about balance. So whether it's a religious narcissist or whether it's just in regards to spirituality, atheism, yoga, whatever it is, a narcissistic person can tarnish any of those things. It's not those entities that are bad. It's the narcissism and the flawed individuals in them. They're the ones that are not so good. So they bring their imperfect selves plus their toxic selves to these entities, and you get a mess. And you get a mess, a flat out mess. So I think that's all I have to go over with the religious narcissists. It can be a particularly negative upbringing for the children. They can be a lot of guilt and shame. They usually have a lot of hang-ups about sex. They've been very controlled. And a lot of them, they can't wait to spread their wings and be able to do their own thing. And they can't wait to get out and about so they can get out under the controlling reach of their parents. Because the religious narcissistic parents, they have no idea. They don't even know, like, this is what's going on. A lot of them, they don't have that self-awareness. They know that they want control. They know they want supply, but often they don't recognize how their behaviors are coming off to others. But some of them are. Some of them are aware, so I shouldn't say that completely, but it just depends. It depends on the person. So with that, I think that's all I got for today. Keep your eyes open for that interview on Saturday, where I'm going to interview an LPC about her experience as an LPC, a licensed professional counselor, and her survivor story. And I think for someone like her, it's good to go to someone that understands narcissism, because there's a lot of therapists that don't understand. So that's important. So Dr. Options has a question here. We'll pop it up. How can you tell if a narc's faith is genuine or manipulative? Yeah, that's a good question. So often there's a couple of different ways to tell. You watch their actions for one. Watch their actions and see if they're trying to do things just for how it looks. Are they more into the praise and admiration they're going to get from their good deeds? Or will they still be the good person and do the good deeds when no one is watching? And there will be no way to get supply from it. Like, can they do a good deed and not post it on social media? Can they do a good deed without someone noticing it so they don't get any admiration? It kind of comes down to my favorite definition of character, which is who you are when no one is watching. And do you help people that can do nothing for you? That's my favorite definition of character. So you keep your eyes open for that. Keep your eyes open for, are they going to help people because it's the right thing to do? Or are they helping people because they want something from it? Do they want the supply? And again, they might help people and they might genuinely help them, but their motives are the things to watch out for. And if they can help someone and get supply, that could be a mixed motive. If they could help somebody and get money, that's a mixed motive. Can they help somebody and get a bigger following? That could also be a mixed motive. So you got to watch out for that. And there'll be little things that you'll be able to see. But I would pay attention to that. Like, are they that person that has faith when no one's watching? Or do they have a double life? Or when no one's watching and they think they can get away with it, they can do any number of things. And just watch out for the congruency. That'll be a big thing to watch out for. So I think that's all, unless there's any other questions here before I go. So if you got this far, again, please remember to subscribe. There's a lot of people that follow me on Facebook that are probably not subscribed to my channel here. And if I'm going to be doing any kind of long videos, that is not going to go on Facebook. That's going to go on YouTube here. So make sure you follow me on YouTube, like the video if you liked it, share this with others that you think might benefit, people that maybe that grew up in this kind of environment too. So, let's see. Yes, very much so. There's a lot of hypocrisy in the narcissistic world in general, which is why they hate it when you match their actions, or it's why they'll hate it when like you treat them how they treat you. They will not like it one bit. And that's a red flag for anybody for that matter. So again, thanks for watching, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.